They called him the nicest man in Hollywood. They said he was too kind, too gentle, too pure for the brutal machinery of celebrity. For 40 years, Keanu Reeves had navigated fame with a quiet grace that made lesser men look like monsters by comparison. He had buried his best friend. He had buried his daughter. He had buried the woman he loved. And through it all, he had remained exactly who he was: patient, kind, present. What Joy Behar failed to understand, what she could not possibly have anticipated, was that kindness and weakness are not the same thing. Not even close. What happened next on The View would become the most shared clip of the year. Not because Keanu Reeves screamed, not because he stormed off, but because he sat perfectly still, looked directly into Joy Behar's eyes, and dismantled her so completely, so surgically, that she had no choice but to flee her own show. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this is the moment the world discovered that the gentlest man in Hollywood also happens to be the most dangerous. The View studio felt different that Wednesday morning. There was an electricity in the air that the production crew couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the unusual guest booking. Keanu Reeves didn't do daytime talk shows. He didn't do press junkets. He appeared when he wanted to appear, said what he wanted to say, and disappeared back into his private life like a ghost. But here he was, settling into the guest chair across from the panel, and that serene expression that had become his trademark. "Welcome to The View, Keanu," Whoopi Goldberg announced with genuine warmth. "It's been too long since you've been here." "Thank you for having me," Keanu replied, his voice carrying that distinctive soft quality that somehow managed to fill the entire studio. "It's good to be here." The audience applauded enthusiastically. These were his people, the ones who had grown up watching Bill and Ted, who had marveled at The Matrix, who had cheered as John Wick carved his way through armies of assassins. They loved him not just for his movies, but for who he seemed to be as a person. Sarah Haynes jumped in first with some softball questions about his upcoming projects. Keanu discussed Outcome, the dark comedy he'd made with Jonah Hill. He talked about The Entertainment System is Down, the A24 film with Ruben Östlund. He mentioned Ballerina and the expanding John Wick universe with the quiet pride of a craftsman discussing his work. "You're 61 years old and still doing these incredible action sequences," Sarah observed. "What's your secret?" Keanu smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made people feel instantly comfortable. "Training. Lots of training. And a wonderful team of stunt coordinators and performers who make me look much better than I actually am." The humility was genuine. It was always genuine with Keanu Reeves. And that, as it turned out, would be exactly what Joy Behar would try to use against him. Joy had been unusually quiet during the opening minutes of the interview. Those who knew her recognized the signs: the slight smirk, the way she kept glancing down at her notes, the predatory stillness of someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Keanu," Joy finally interjected, her voice carrying that edge that regular viewers had learned to dread. "I have to ask you something that's been on my mind for a while." Keanu turned his full attention to her, his expression open and curious. "Of course. What would you like to know?" "This whole nice guy thing," Joy said, gesturing vaguely in his direction. "The stories about you giving up your seat on the subway, helping stranded motorists, giving your salary to the crew. It's all very impressive. But don't you think people are getting a little tired of the act?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Joy Behar had just accused Keanu Reeves of being a fraud on live television. Keanu's expression didn't change. Not a flicker of anger, not a hint of defensiveness. He simply regarded Joy with those calm eyes and asked, "What act would that be?" "Oh, come on," Joy laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Nobody is that nice all the time. Nobody gives away millions of dollars without some kind of angle. You've been in Hollywood for 40 years. You must know how the game is played." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi was already reaching for her coffee cup, a clear sign that she was preparing to intervene. But Keanu held up a gentle hand, indicating that he wanted to address this himself. "Joy," he said softly, "I think you might be confusing kindness with performance. They're not the same thing." Aren't they? Joy pressed, leaning forward with that familiar, aggressive posture. In Hollywood, everything is a performance. Every public appearance, every interview, every act of charity. It's all calculated to build a brand. And your brand just happens to be the nice guy. Keanu nodded slowly, as if genuinely considering her words. That's an interesting perspective. Can I ask you something? Joy seemed slightly thrown by the question. She had expected defensiveness, maybe anger. Not this quiet curiosity. Sure, go ahead. When you assume that kindness must be calculated, what does that say about how you view the world? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread across Joy's face as she processed what he was really asking. She opened her mouth to respond, but Keanu continued, his voice still gentle, but now carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, he said. This idea that goodness must have an ulterior motive, that nobody does anything without expecting something in return. It seems like a very lonely way to move through life. Joy's eyes narrowed. I'm not lonely. I'm realistic. I've been in this business long enough to know that everyone has an angle. Everyone? Keanu asked. That's a lot of people to distrust. I don't distrust everyone. I'm just skeptical of people who seem too good to be true. Keanu leaned back in his chair, and something shifted in his demeanor. The gentleness was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else. A quiet strength that suggested depths Joy hadn't anticipated. Joy, I'm going to tell you something that I don't usually talk about in interviews. Is that okay? Joy nodded, suddenly uncertain of where this conversation was heading. When I was younger, my best friend River Phoenix died in my arms. He was 23 years old, the most talented person I'd ever met, and he was gone in an instant. Keanu's voice remained steady, but there was a heaviness to it now. A few years later, my girlfriend Jennifer and I were expecting a child. A daughter. We were going to name her Ava. The studio had gone completely silent. Even Joy seemed frozen in place. Ava was stillborn on Christmas Eve, 1999, 8 months into the pregnancy. Jennifer never recovered from the grief. We tried to stay together, but the pain was too much. We broke up, but we remained close. We were actually getting back together when she died in a car accident 18 months later. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the studio. I spent years after that wondering why I was still here. Why I survived when so many people I loved didn't. And somewhere in that darkness, I made a decision. I decided that if I was going to keep living, I was going to try to leave the world a little better than I found it. Not for publicity, not for my brand, but because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Joy's face had gone pale. Whatever attack she had been planning, whatever clever follow-up she had prepared, it had evaporated in the face of this quiet, devastating honesty. But Keanu wasn't finished. You want to know why I give my salary to the crew? Because I remember what it was like to have nothing. Because those people work just as hard as I do, sometimes harder, and they don't get the recognition. Because money means less to me than making sure the people around me feel valued. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Joy's. You want to know why I give up my seat on the subway? Because someone else needed it more than I did. It's not complicated. It's not calculated. It's just what you do when you see another human being who needs something you can easily give. Joy tried to recover her footing. That's all very touching, but surely you can understand why people might be skeptical. In this industry, nice guys don't usually survive. Keanu smiled, but it was a sad smile. The smile of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. You're right that this industry can be brutal. I've seen it destroy people. Good people, talented people. But I've also seen kindness change lives. I've seen a simple act of compassion turn someone's entire day around. I've seen crew members remember years later that someone took the time to learn their names and ask about their families. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a new edge. What I find interesting, Joy, is that you seem determined to prove that kindness doesn't exist, that everyone is secretly as cynical as you are. And I wonder what happened in your life to make you believe that. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Joy's face flushed red, And for the first time in the interview, she looked genuinely rattled. "I'm not cynical," she protested. "I'm realistic. There's a difference." "Is there?" Keanu asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've built an entire career on tearing people down, on assuming the worst about everyone who walks onto this stage, on creating conflict because conflict gets ratings." The other hosts exchanged nervous glances. This was not the Keanu Reeves anyone had expected. This was someone who had been pushed, gently but persistently, toward a line he didn't want to cross, and who had finally decided to push back. "That's not fair," Joy said, her voice rising defensively. "I ask tough questions, that's my job." "No," Keanu replied, his voice still calm but now carrying unmistakable authority. "Tough questions serve a purpose. They illuminate truth. They hold power accountable. What you've been doing for the past 10 minutes isn't tough questioning. It's attempted character assassination disguised as journalism." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Keanu continued, his words flowing with the precision of someone who had thought very carefully about what he wanted to say. "You looked at a person who has spent decades trying to be kind, who has given away millions of dollars, who has worked to lift up the people around him, and your first instinct was to try to prove it was all fake. What does that accomplish? Who does that help?" "The audience deserves to know the truth," Joy shot back, but her voice was shaking now. "The truth?" Keanu's laugh was soft, almost gentle. "The truth is that I've made mistakes. Plenty of them. The truth is that I'm not perfect and I've never claimed to be. The truth is that I'm a human being trying to do my best in a world that can be incredibly cruel." He gestured toward Joy with one hand, his movements slow and deliberate. "But here's another truth, Joy. You have a platform that reaches millions of people. You have the power to shape how they see the world. And you use that power to spread cynicism, to convince people that kindness is always a con, to make them distrust anyone who tries to do good." The studio audience, which had been silent throughout this exchange, began to shift restlessly. The energy in the room had changed. It was no longer neutral. It was tilting decisively toward Keanu. "You know what I've noticed about people who are determined to see the worst in others?" Keanu continued, his voice still soft but now filled with a quiet devastation. "They're usually trying to justify something in themselves. They can't believe that kindness is real, because if kindness is real, then their own unkindness becomes a choice rather than a necessity." Joy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "I don't have to sit here and be psychoanalyzed by an actor." "You're right," Keanu agreed, remaining perfectly calm in his seat. "You don't. But before you go, I want you to consider something." Joy paused, her hand on the back of her chair, her breathing visibly rapid. "Every day, you have a choice. You can use your voice to tear people down, or you can use it to lift them up. You can spread cynicism, or you can spread hope. You can assume the worst about people, or you can look for the best." Keanu's eyes never left hers. "So far, you've made your choice very clear. I hope someday you'll consider making a different one." The silence that followed was absolute. Joy stood frozen at her spot, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to identify. Anger, humiliation, and something else. Something that might have been shame. "I think I need to step away for a moment," Joy finally said, her voice tight and controlled. "Excuse me." And with that, Joy Behar walked off her own set, leaving Keanu Reeves sitting calmly in the guest chair, surrounded by stunned hosts and an audience that didn't quite know how to react. The cameras followed her as she disappeared backstage, her heels clicking rapidly against the studio floor. In 17 years of The View, no host had ever walked off their own show because of something a guest had said. Until today. The other hosts sat in stunned silence. Sarah Haynes was staring at her notes as if they might contain some explanation for what had just happened. Alyssa Farah Griffin kept glancing toward the producers behind the cameras, clearly hoping for some guidance that wasn't coming. Even Whoopi, who had seen more than her share of explosive moments on this show, looked genuinely shaken. Whoopi recovered first. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, I think we should probably take a quick commercial break. But Keanu shook his head gently. If it's okay, I'd like to say one more thing. Whoopi nodded, clearly uncertain but unwilling to deny his request. Keanu looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. To anyone watching this who has been told that their kindness is fake, that their compassion is calculated, that their desire to help others is somehow suspicious, I want you to know something. Don't let the cynics win. Don't let people who have given up on goodness convince you to give up too. The world needs more kindness, not less. And the people who try to tear you down for being kind are telling you far more about themselves than they are about you. He smiled then, that gentle, genuine smile that had charmed audiences for 4 decades. Be excellent to each other. It's not complicated. The audience erupted into applause. Not the polite, prompted applause of a television studio, but the genuine, spontaneous applause of people who had just witnessed something they would never forget. In the hours that followed, the clip went viral. Keanu Reeves destroys Joy Behar with kindness became the top trending topic worldwide. Think pieces were written about the difference between cynicism and wisdom. Celebrities posted their own stories of Keanu's quiet generosity. News outlets scrambled to analyze what had happened, with commentators debating whether Joy had simply picked the wrong target or whether something deeper was at work. The consensus, however, was nearly unanimous. Keanu Reeves had done something remarkable. He had stood up for himself without ever raising his voice, without ever losing his composure, without ever becoming the kind of person Joy was trying to paint him as. The stunt coordinators and crew members who had worked with Keanu over the years began sharing their own stories. Chad Stahelski, who had directed all 4 John Wick films, posted, "This is the Keanu I know. The one who trains harder than anyone. The one who remembers everyone's name. The one who bought our stunt team Rolex watches as a thank you. He's not playing a character. He is the character." Lawrence Fishburne, who had worked with Keanu for decades, posted simply, "He's kinder than people say he is. Much kinder. And today he showed the world that kindness doesn't mean weakness." Aziz Ansari, who had directed Keanu in Good Fortune, wrote, "I've been saying for years that he's actually an angel pretending to be human. Today he proved it." Sandra Bullock, his Speed co-star and longtime friend, shared, "This is the Keanu I know. The one who shows up. The one who cares. The one who never stops being exactly who he is, no matter what. 30 years of friendship, and he's never once let me down." Hiroyuki Sanada, who had fought alongside Keanu in John Wick Chapter 4, added, "He is so humble, very kind to others but very hard on himself. Today the world saw what we have always known." Alexandra Grant, Keanu's partner since 2019, shared a simple heart emoji with no caption necessary. But those who knew her understood the depth of meaning behind that small gesture. She had watched the man she loved be attacked for the very qualities that made her fall in love with him in the first place. And she had watched him respond not with anger, but with the quiet dignity that defined everything he did. And somewhere, Joy Behar sat alone in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror, forced to confront the question that Keanu had planted in her mind. A question she had been avoiding for decades. The makeup lights were harsh, unforgiving, and in their glare she saw not the television personality who had spent years asking tough questions, but something else, someone else, someone who had confused cruelty with courage and cynicism with wisdom. What did it say about her that she couldn't believe kindness was real? The question would follow her for days, weeks, maybe longer. And for the first time in her career, Joy Behar had no clever comeback, no dismissive retort, no way to pretend that what had happened in that studio was anything other than what it was, a moment of truth she hadn't been prepared for. As for Keanu Reeves, he finished the interview, thanked the remaining hosts for their hospitality, and walked off the set with the same quiet grace he'd carried for 40 years. The gentlest man in Hollywood had proven once again that kindness and strength are not opposites. Sometimes they are exactly the same thing. What did you think about this incredible confrontation? Did Keanu Reeves handle Joy Behar perfectly? Or would you have responded differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that will absolutely blow your mind.